the CFO was trying to tell James, you can't keep doing this because the IRS, they look at stuff like this and they'll shut us down for any reason. So James fired the CFO, which you can't fire the CFO if you're a CEO. CFO is board appointed. That triggered an emergency board meeting. We want this to continue to work. We just can't be treated this way. That's all. And the board members themselves were saying, James, we need you to lead this company, but we have to, there are certain, we're 501c3 and there's certain guardrails that you have that are in place that you have to abide by. James even had this apology letter where he said, I need to change because if I don't change, then Project Veritas will cease to exist. Someone leaked to Tim Pool and Jack Posobiec that James O'Keefe had been ousted by the board of Project Veritas, which was a lie, a complete lie. Oh, James O'Keefe was, this must be Pfizer, and this must be, and like, because we had just released the Pfizer. Did Pfizer buy off the board of Project Veritas? And if he was actually the victim of a coup, why would you not fight? Why would you not fight for what you built?
Christian Hartsock is a filmmaker and an investigative journalist. He worked at Project Veritas for almost 15 years and became a chief investigative reporter. Christian broke some of Project Veritas' biggest stories, exposing the Clinton campaign's secret operation to incite violence at Trump rallies. CNN contributor Van Jones' real thoughts on the Russiagate Nothing Burger hoax, and high-level Google executives' efforts to interfere in the 2020 election. Mr. Hartsock went on to work for Andrew Breitbart up until his death, breaking the Clarence Thomas lynch mob, fake sick notes, and noodle stories, reporting in treacherous zones from the Ferguson riots to Saddam Hussein's palaces, and co-starring with Steve Bannon's Occupy Unmasked. As chief investigative reporter for Project Veritas, Christian recruited, trained, and mentored undercover journalists, directed and conducted undercover investigations, reported from the field, confronted fake journalists, fake news executives, and censorious tech executives on camera, and carried the message to fellow truth seekers nationwide. Christian left Project Veritas in 2024. Christian is a man of God. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with Project Veritas. So what happened to this great company once, right? Because I see James O'Keefe is doing an incredible job. He just premiered his new movie, A Line in the Sand, with Tucker, but we don't hear anything about the Project Veritas since he left.
Well, yeah.
If you can just a little bit closer.
Yeah, so, oh boy. Well, so I start, where do I start? I'll start in 2009. So I started, I met James in 2009. He had seen a trailer for my thesis film. I just graduated from film school, and I had this little thesis film that I wrote and directed called Sycophant, which you can watch online. And James was very impressed with the production values, and so he reached out to me. And this was before Acorn, before James O'Keefe was even Googleable. Yeah. He reached out to me. This is late 2008, and he asked me if I would help him out with some video ideas, and he just wanted to discuss video ideas that he had. So what happened? He reached out to me, and I knew him. I didn't know anything about him except months earlier that year. There was a story on the news about a recording of a donor who had called into Planned Parenthood, claiming that he wanted to earmark a sizable donation for a clinic in a black community because he wanted to, he said the less black kids out there, the better.
No way.
Yeah. So, because he had a white son that he wanted to get into college and didn't want to be competing with, through affirmative action. And
That's a true story?
Well, I heard it on the radio, and I was like, this is either evil or brilliant. So if this is a prank, and it turned out it was a prank, and James O'Keefe was James O'Keefe and Lila Rose were the perps behind the prank. And so when I heard that this guy James O'Keefe had done that, I was like, I would love to meet this guy. So when he reached out to me, and wanted to work with me, I was like, hell yeah. And around that same time, I just recently moved to LA. I was just finishing up film school, and I had Evan Sayet, who is a very talented comic and writer. He wrote for Bill Maher and Arsenio Hall back in the day, and he's written a number of great books, The Kindergarten of Eden. And I met him serendipitously in 2009, and he sponsored in 2008, and he sponsored me to become part of Friends of Abe, which was this secret society of conservatives in the entertainment industry. And it had, David Mamet, John Voight, Gary Sinise, the Wheaties guy, what was his name, who turned into a girl? The Olympic. Jenner.
Yeah,
Bruce Jenner. Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah.
And so all these very prominent people in the entertainment industry, and so I was brought into this secret society, and I met Andrew Breitbart around that same time. And Andrew Breitbart and I became friends coincidentally around the same time that James O'Keefe was reaching out to me and telling me his ideas, and we were swapping ideas for videos we wanted to make. And one of James's ideas was to go into Acorn offices, which was the housing at the time, one of the housing advocacy groups that basically contributed to the housing bubble. And Obama was had previously been their lawyer, and Obama had just been inaugurated president. Anyway, so James's idea was to go into these Acorn offices with Hannah Giles, pretending to be a pimp and a prostitute, and asking for housing advice, well, asking for help setting up brothels for 14-year-old El Salvadoran sex slaves. And wearing hidden cameras, these Acorn workers were like, oh, yeah, so you want to list them as dependents, and don't say prostitution, say performing arts, on your tax forms. So this ended up, these videotapes, and this was the Citizen Kane, the Reservoir Dogs of Veritas, of James O'Keefe's legacy. And Andrew Breitbart premiered them on biggovernment.com. And James, I had a very small part in those. I shot down in Huntington Beach. I shot B-roll of interstitial footage of Hannah Giles pretending to be a prostitute. That was intercut with the undercover footage. So those videos put Breitbart, James O'Keefe on the map, which was Veritas Visuals at the time. And the tapes were so egregious that President Obama, who was Acorn's former attorney, he condemned them, and he even signed legislation to defund Acorn. It was humongous. So this is where we really struck. The left had dominated media, academia, and entertainment for the last 50 years. Six branches of government.
Six.
Well, yeah, media, academia. I'm speaking proverbially, This was our kind of way of striking our flag in the sand on the battlefield of media and waging a guerrilla war against the media establishment, because every single media outlet was forced to cover this. Even Jon Stewart did this hilarious and very favorable to us coverage of the story. So it was a huge win in the culture war, in the media war, in the information war. So anyway, fast forward a few years, I'm working with James O'Keefe I'm working with Andrew Breitbart and doing kind of some of my own stories. So for instance, 2010, I went undercover or it might have been 2011. I went undercover just by myself down in Palm Springs at this rally. It was Citizens United. Ruling had just passed, and there was all these left-wing, this Common Cause, this leftist group was organizing this rally down in Palm Springs because the Koch brothers were in town, and they were staying in some hotel. So Common Cause had organized these ralliers to yell at the building because they were all pissed about the ruling on campaign finance that Clarence Thomas had rolled on. So I had this idea to go up to wearing an Obama t-shirt, going up to people with a handheld camera. This was back in the day where you could use a handheld camera and, get in people's face and pretend all you needed was an Obama t-shirt and a friendly face and say,
You've got the VIP entrance.
And I said, what do we do with Clarence Thomas after we impeach him? And they're all, string him up, put him back in the fields, hang him. And and at the time, there was 2 years into the Tea Party, and the mainstream media was saying the Tea Party is racist. The Tea Party, and this was 2 weeks after the Tucson shooting, where Jared Leffner, who turned out to be a socialist, was accused of being this white right-wing extremist who shot Gabby Giffords, having been inspired by the Tea Party, and racist violent rhetoric in the Tea Party. It was all crap because they couldn't find any racism in the Tea Party. For 2 years, I found in one liberal rally over the course of 2 hours, everything the mainstream media had been trying to find in the Tea Party for 2 years. So meanwhile, I'm doing independent filmmaking, outside of politics, and also doing stuff with Andrew Breitbart hired me to work with him full time. And I was also kind of tag teaming with James O'Keefe. This is 2010, 2011. And O'Keefe was running Veritas Visuals, which was these were the GarageBand days. It was before Project Veritas, before it was incorporated as a 501c3. And I was working for Andrew doing a lot of coverage on James O'Keefe's stories. And basically I was kind of like the Breitbart, I would cover at Breitbart the media information war that always inevitably transpired after the O'Keefe story. And I was also collaborating with O'Keefe on some of the videos, like Teachers Unions Gone Wild. I was the producer on. So anyway, fast forward to 2012, Andrew Breitbart randomly dies at age 43.
Yeah,
I was the last to see him in the office the night he died, and which was very tragic and horrifying. And over the next few, this was shortly before James O'Keefe created Project Veritas. What was Veritas Visuals is a DBA. He incorporated it into a 501c3 along with Matt Tiermond and some handpicked board members who were his dear friends, Joe Barton as well, that James O'Keefe handpicked. And they created Project Veritas. Now, under Project Veritas, some of my, as you read a few of my biggest stories, there was the Clinton campaign story. In 2016, I infiltrated the half a dozen lefty groups in Wisconsin and kind of wormed my way around, knocking on doors and for Hillary Clinton, getting out the vote, making phone calls. I knocked on more doors for Hillary Clinton in the state of Wisconsin than Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton did not set foot in Wisconsin once. And because she had, supposedly she thought it was going to, because Bob Creamer, the whole Chicago machine, Bob Creamer, who was married to Jan Schakowsky, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, and ran since the 70s, basically this Chicago, the political Chicago outfit that basically dominated Wisconsin politics, was the reason why Wisconsin was blue, for the last 20 years since Reagan. Reagan was the last Republican to win Wisconsin. She thought, probably he had it all locked up because they every single election, the sources on the ground in Wisconsin told me that all these mysterious buses would come out of Chicago and they'd be whizzing around the city all day, and of course every single election went to the Democrats. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, I can get into the details later. They're a lot of fun if you want to hear. But essentially, I found out that Bob Creamer was Hillary Clinton's top guy, and or his her dirty tricks, her top guy in the dirty tricks operations, and that he was running this operation where they were sending bird doggers, paid agitators, to Trump rallies to incite violence and make it look like Trump supporters were violent. And so I uncovered that.
This was the first incident when they were telling us that the right is violent?
Oh no, they had been doing that since since obviously, since 2010, like for instance, when I got the Clarence Thomas lynch mob story, that was a very thematically similar story in that it was a circumstance in which, the media drumbeat was, racist, violent Tea Party rhetoric. Racist, violent Tea Party rhetoric is causing violence, actual violence. Jared Luffner, who was a fan of the Communist Manifesto, they thought that there was this website on sarahpac.com where there was an electoral map and there was surveyor symbols that looked like crosshairs. So therefore, Jared Luffner must have been surfing the web and must have stumbled across it, and therefore was like, I'm going to go shoot Gabby Giffords, which is the most ridiculous narrative. No, he was a socialist, a Democrat. I think he had voted for Gabby Giffords, he was not a right-wing extremist. But anyway, fast forward, to 6 years. It was no longer the Tea Party. It was racist, violent Trump supporters, causing actual violence. And so what they were doing, what Scott Foval, who was, Bob Creamer's right-hand man, bragged to me at a bar in Milwaukee on hidden camera, that they would get mentally ill people to do crazy stuff, and that they would. But, it was usually a black person or a veteran or a 69-year-old woman with COPD that they would put in the front of the line, to basically poke, find, in a crowd of thousands of Trump supporters, find the one person that, was a little, not totally there, and poke until they lashed out, and then, create a chain reaction of they would plant people in the crowd so that the cameras picked up this chain reaction when the violence, erupted, and it would make it look like the entire, it's a violent, this black guy is getting beat up, or this 69-year-old woman is getting cold cocked. It was all just, as Scott Foval explained it to me, stagecraft.
And you got this on record?
Yes. Yeah. I got him bragging to me about it.
That's the first time I hear it. I believe I'm not the only one. I believe that was 8 years ago. It was a big story
at the time. Yeah. It made the front page of the New York Times twice in opening week. They printed the image that my button camera picked up of Scott Foval talking to me and explaining, the DNC pays the Clinton campaign. The Clinton campaign pays Democracy Partners, which is Bob Creamer. Democracy Partners pays the Foval Group, Scott Foval, and the Foval Group executes the stuff on the ground. So, and he spelled it all out for me. And that was another case where every single mainstream media outlet was forced to cover it, and they were forced to cover it fairly because it was so bad. Even Van Jones was on CNN on Anderson Cooper saying, yeah, this is pretty bad.
Wasn't he shaking?
Yeah. They all had to admit this looks really bad for Clinton. And Donald Trump, in the third debate, brought it up to Hillary Clinton's face, and she had nothing to say about it. There was nothing she could say about it. So,
but anyways, she was so assured she's going to win.
Oh yeah, it was, but that's another thing is my sources on the ground in Wisconsin. Now this is what they say. I'm not saying it, but they told me, look, listen, every single day or every single election day for the last 20 years, these buses, these vans come out of Chicago, which are obviously being organized by the Bob Creamers and the Scott Fovals and the Chicago, dirty tricksters. The town was dead on Election Day 2016. None of the vans came out of Chicago that day. And what happened? Wisconsin went red for the first time since Ronald Reagan.
Wait a minute. So prior to that, buses from Chicago went to Wisconsin?
Yes.
To vote?
Well, who knows what they were doing, supposedly. I mean, they would do all kinds of electioneering, dirty tricks. That supposedly, the reason why I was sent to Wisconsin in the first place was to investigate vote bribery, which I did not find, but I ended up stumbling across this much more elaborate and, higher level operation that was being run by Scott Foval and Bob Creamer.
So you want to tell me that Illinois was so red so they could get even people with the ballots go to another state to cast a vote?
I don't know. I just know that they would. That was one of the suspicions, that that they would, all these, these union types, and I don't want to badmouth the unions because they're actually, on good behavior these days. But at the time, that whole SEIU, AFL-CIO, that whole Alinskyite, complex, that whole political Chicago outfit that had been around since the 70s with Bob Creamer's, fingerprints all over it, the Midwest Academy, the Heather Booths, the people who came from SDS in the 60s and then got organized, in the 1970s.
SDS
in the 1980s, the Students for a Democrat Society, and Obama, the place where Obama came from in the 80s, that was the Obama came from that, the SEIU, Acorn, all those, that whole constellation of political action committee or political groups, Citizens United. Just the whole cluster of groups that are in the Midwest and organizing and picketing, and that was basically the ecosystem that Obama came from, and they had been organizing Midwestern politics, and successfully so throughout, from the 80s on. That's why so many of those Midwestern states, they organized the unions, they organized in Indiana, Wisconsin, Ohio. Pennsylvania, especially Western Pennsylvania. The unions were for the Now, Trump has done something very fascinating in the last few years because he has gotten the blue collar, the unions to actually go for him. So there's a very strange thing happening. But for the longest time, it was that whole Jimmy Hoffa Jr. contingent was a solid Democrat apparatus.
Would you say unions are communists, basically?
A lot of them were, of course. In fact, my grandfather, Jacob Aronson, he came from Norway. He was an immigrant from Norway, moved to East Oakland, and started a newspaper called the East Bay News. And he actually was, at the time, this is the 40s and 50s, he was editorializing about Harry Bridges' Longshoremen's Union. Harry Bridges was this, he was a communist, and he organized the ports in Oregon and Northern California, in San Francisco. And he was a communist. He had actually been deported. And he sent a bunch of, since my grandpa Jake was writing about him in his newspaper, Harry Bridges sent his thugs to beat up and they attempted to murder my grandfather twice, left him for dead. And he just kept on writing.
1940s.
In the 40s and 50s, yeah. Now, I never got to meet him. He died in 1958. But he was... I read his writings sometimes, and the same stuff was going on back then that is going on today. And he actually apparently, my parents didn't even know this, but he actually did undercover reporting. In his time. He infiltrated, according to his writings, he infiltrated the Communist Party. He infiltrated the American Nazi Party, the Ku Klux Klan. And
all the good guys.
Yeah.
amazing clubs.
Yeah. And so I don't know how I managed to, I grew up, idolizing James Bond and reading Mission Impossible or watching Mission Impossible and, spy movies and pulp novels. And I always fancied myself a spy when I was a little kid. So I don't know how I managed to full circle, actually become something of a spy, when.
So what happened to the Project Veritas?
So, So that was the whole. Okay, so yeah. You're right. There is a lot of caffeine in this. Project Veritas. So anyway, we had a lot of big wins, and James O'Keefe, he pioneered this this craft of investigative journalism. Now, investigative journalism, undercover journalism had, of course, existed in the past. Mike Wallace had done it. My Grandpa Jake had done it, but it had never actually existed as a profession until James O'Keefe, along with his board members, his founding board members, Matt Tiermond, Joe Barton, and George Skakel, his hand-picked board, they created this. They institutionalized this craft, and I, being sort of a founding member, also helped. We didn't have a handbook for it. We had to learn all the lessons the hard way. And we went on from doing these acorn stories to doing these humongous stories. When we did the Democracy Partners, the Clinton story, that was that ended up, we were a 501c3 and ended up doubling our budget going into 2017. I think we were a $5 million company in 2016, and then we released Democracy Partners. I think overnight, practically, we became an $11 million company. And then ultimately, the last couple of years, we're talking, I think our last projection in our final year was 30 million. We were looking for 30 million.
All the small donations?
Yeah, mostly small donations, yeah. Now, here's the thing. We were 501c3, and there are rules with a 501c3. And, we are answerable to the IRS. And because we're, and of course the IRS, being the IRS, well, there's good reason to believe that they will jump at any chance to shut us down. Of course, during the Obama era, Obama was going after groups like FOA, for instance, 501c3s, conservative organizations. And Obama's IRS was what was her name? Lois Lerner. They were cracking down on conservative organizations. So we had a reason to be very vigilant and make sure. And James always told us, act as if there's a jury of, there's 12 jurors breathing over your shoulders, and never say or do anything that you don't want on the front page of the New York Times. So ultimately what happened was there was a confluence of things. There was, number one, there was employee complaints about the way James was treating them. And
which were true or not?
Look, I trust the people that I trained and that were my brothers and sisters in the trenches for the last 6 months of Project Veritas' existence, who had absolutely nothing to gain by staying with Project Veritas except sticking by their principles, and everything to lose by sticking with Project Veritas. I trust them ultimately, and I don't want to litigate a lot of those complaints. Those were their complaints, but what I do know is, and James and I had our ups and downs. We were dear friends. We were very close friends. I considered him one of my best friends, going from 2009 all the way to 20. I believe I was the longest friend he ever had. I was the most loyal friend he ever had, certainly. And I stuck by him when he was arrested in New Orleans, in 2010. And you had conservatives who were throwing him under the bus after he did this CNN Love Boat thing, which I won't get into the details, but they're Googleable. I stuck by him. And conservatives were throwing him under the bus. L. Brent Bozell was throwing him under the bus. Even Andrew Breitbart was saying James O'Keefe has some explaining to do about certain things. I always stuck by him when it was unpopular to do so. When it was practically career suicide to not stand by him, I did the opposite. I'm always doing the least popular thing when it comes to James O'Keefe. Well, it's friendship, but also you're right, it is friendship, and it's also even when in 2023 when I did not stand by. It's not that I didn't stand by him. I just didn't. Well, first, let me. I'm getting sidetracked. Around the same time, 2023, we had just released the Pfizer story, which was a humongous story. And you remember the story. we had that Pfizer scientist talking about duplicating the virus, essentially doing what was the term? It's been a while. What was the term that they used? I mean, it was gain of function, but he had a specific term of art that he used. Anyway, that was a humongous story, and that was basically our peak, probably our biggest story ever. And around that same time, there was this shortly after that, there was this very tumultuous meeting that I was not in, where and it was back at headquarters, and this is February 2023, and the CFO had this pattern of bringing to James's attention, James, you can't keep doing these things where you're having to pay the company back, where you're, spending company money on personal allurement and having to pay the company back. For instance, and this is just a fact, there was a Christmas party, and James mentioned this in his farewell address, in his President's Day speech, that there was a Christmas party that was a Project Veritas company Christmas party, and it was given at this venue that was actually the venue for James's wedding. Had initially, but James had made an $11,000 down payment, I believe, on this on this wedding venue, and then the engagement broke off, and he, rather than eat the cost, he repurposed it to the venue for a company Christmas party so that the donor money would pay for it, which I enjoyed. It was a fun Christmas party. I wasn't complaining at the time, but Tom, the CFO, was trying to tell James, you can't keep doing this because the IRS, they look at stuff like this and they'll shut us down for any reason. And also at the same time, James was also had a fight with Barry Hinckley, who was the chief strategist, something officer, anyway, about about the manner in which they were going to raise money. And James wanted him to email every single person at a party they had been at, asking for $20,000. And Barry was like, James, I've cultivated these donors for a long time. That's not the way I want to do it. These are my people. I'm not going to send them all an email asking for $20,000. And James fired him, and he also fired Tom, the CFO. Yeah. So who was saying, James, you can't keep doing these things where you have to pay the company back, because James was having to pay the company back. So James fired the CFO, which you can't fire the CFO if you're a CEO. CFO is board appointed, just like the CEO. It's technically board appointed. So James told the COO, Dan Strack, that he had a board buy-in to fire Tom. And Dan Strack was like, okay, well, so he followed up with the board buy-in with the board member that allegedly signed off on firing Tom, and that board member was like, I didn't authorize that. So it turns out that James had lied.
He got lied.
To fire, which he was not allowed to do. So that's when that triggered an emergency board meeting, and they sat James down on February 6, 2023, and they said, okay, James, we love you. We want to continue this legacy. We want to continue Project Veritas. We want you to continue leading Project Veritas. You can't treat the employees the way you've been treating employees. And you can't fire the CFO without board approval and claim you had board approval. You can't do that. And then a whole number of things that they want to talk about with regard to the financials. Now, I listened to this board James surreptitiously recorded this board meeting. He sent me the tape, and I listened to it. And James, I remember him texting me and calling me and during it and saying, how far are you into listening to it? And I was like, oh, I'm only 2 hours into it. It's a 6-hour board meeting. Yeah. I'm like, he's like, are you mad yet? Are you mad yet? I'm like, I'm still listening. I haven't really, gathered my thoughts yet, but I'm listening to it. And I just hear all these employee after employee describing, in very, upsetting detail, the ways that they had been treated by James, but sandwiching everything in reassurances to James that I love you. We love you. We want to keep working for you. We're proud to work for you. And we want this to continue to work. We just can't be treated this way. That's all. And the board members themselves were saying, James, we need you to lead this company, but we have to, there are certain, we're 501c3 and there's certain guardrails that you have that are in place that you have to abide by. And James, if you listen to the tape, which is public, James even had this apology letter where he said, I need to change because if I don't change, then Project Veritas will cease to exist. James O'Keefe said that. Well, that turned out to, so anyway, what happened was they said, okay, James, take a 2-week break. We will pay for, if you need to get some help, some mental help, health help, we will pay for that. And James was very thankful for that. If you listen to the tape, he was very thankful for that. And, very like, yeah, I need help. I need to change somehow because, I feel terrible about the way, Well, something happened. And James, by the way, called me that morning in tears, but hours before the board meeting, and humbled. And I heard James humbled before. James and I had been through, experiences where he was knocked on his ass and got up a better man. And I was like, okay, this is going to be one of those times. Mm-hmm. And James told me, I'm sorry that I haven't been a better friend, a better leader. I need to change. I said, yeah, we'll get through this, James. Don't worry. And something happened in between that board meeting and I think later that night. So I think it was some loyalists, some James O'Keefe loyalists, which there's no one more loyal to James O'Keefe than me. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. So I'm using that word cheekily. And I think true loyalty sometimes means the opposite of enabling. Someone leaked to Tim Pool and Jack Posobiec that James O'Keefe had been ousted by the board of Project Veritas, which was a lie, a complete lie. And of course, so, these click-hungry, influencers, I hate to say it because I used to admire them, they put it on Twitter and then, of course, incited this army of torch-carrying,
James O'Keefe fans.
Yeah, who don't actually care about James O'Keefe, don't actually care about the man, but himself, but we're, like, oh, James O'Keefe this must be Pfizer, and this must be, and like, because we had just released the Pfizer. Ooh, did Pfizer buy off the board of Project Veritas?
Yeah, I remember.
Which is
remember those tweets. Yes,
it's like Russiagate level, and madness.
But both of them, Tim Pool and Jack
Posobiec, they just went along with it.
Should have called him. Well, did they have his number?
James O'Keefe. Well, but that's the thing is James O'Keefe echoed. I was on the phone with James O'Keefe later. I was listening to. I remember listening to a live stream on Twitter, a Twitter Space, and someone. This was like the night after the ousting. Mm-hmm. And they were all talking about it, and James is listening in on it, and he had gone dark. He was not talking to his staff. He was not talking to anyone. He was talking to a few people. He was talking to me, and he was talking to a few other people too. But he was not talking to his staff, and Dan Strack was begging him to talk to the staff and address his staff and lead his freaking company because he was not. And I asked James, I was like, James, why don't you talk to your company? Why don't you talk to your staff? Everyone is wondering where you are. And he's like, I can't. I'm gagged. James, you're not gagged. I listened to the tape. No one gagged you. They said you can't Oh yeah, this is the thing I didn't mention. He was temporarily suspended from talking to donors, because they had to do an internal audit, an internal financial audit, cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure that in the event of an IRS audit, we don't get shut down. And they froze this company card because, look, if there's evidence of financial malfeasance, you can't investigate unless you turn off the water. You know what I mean?
When you're digging the hole, you have to stop digging.
Yeah, exactly. So he was temperate, and James didn't really, he wasn't calling this a coup during the 6 hour, which, by the way, he to this day calls that 6 hour recording a crucifixion. Hardly a crucifixion when literally everyone in that room is telling you how much they love you and adore you.
And who posted that record? He?
He never did, which was funny. It never did.
Leaked.
It ended up being leaked by someone.
What kind of company that
I think
was?
It's Callan. It's okay. Right? Callan leaked it. Yeah. Pardon?
What kind of company that was? 2 leaks in 2 days?
Well, no. The board recording was not leaked until way later.
Oh, okay.
Way later, but way later. And it was by a good guy, Callan Erickson, because James for a year, was set, and he even said in his President's Day speech, I implore, which was leaked to Tim Pool, was supposed to just be for employees. He even said to his employees, demand from the board that they show you the recording so you can see and hear how I was crucified for 6 hours, which is kind of similar to the trick that JFK played on Nixon in when he was talking about Cuba, and he knew that Nixon could not disclose certain things that they were doing in Cuba when he was claiming you're not doing anything about Cuba. It was kind of that same tactic. James knew that the board could not actually divulge the tape that they recorded because of employee protections and HIPAA laws. They could he knew they couldn't do that. So it was sort of like teasing this. It was sort of like Al Capone's vault. It's like there's nothing in there that's going to support your narrative.
Yes.
But that they're not in a position to publish the tape. So therefore, you're going to say, "Oh, demand that they publish the tape," because they're not going to publish it. And if they did, it would completely undermine your entire narrative. So.
Which eventually happened.
Yeah, eventually a year later, Callan Erickson gave it to some guys, which I apologize, I'm not. I'll plug their podcast, but Callan Erickson, he leaked that tape, and to his credit, which I'm glad he did, because I kept saying, why isn't James leak it? Why isn't James leak it? If it was such a crucifixion, why isn't he leak it? So anyway, Tim Pool and Jack Posobiec and all these guys, it really was that this knee-jerk reactionism is really what had theretofore been mostly a definitively leftist phenomenon. Whatever Jim Acosta says, whatever Jake Tapper says, this parrot army. It was the same behavior that I saw on the right. And James was not gagged from speaking to his company. He was not gagged from speaking to the staff at all. He could have totally been a leader. And if he was actually, the victim of a coup, why would you not fight? Why would you not fight for what you built from the ground up? Why did he leave?
I believe that's how the audience felt. Why wasn't he fighting? Because he established the company. The whole Project Veritas was James O'Keefe, right?
Yeah. And I was saying to James on the phone, James, sue. If this was a coup, then sue the MFers. And James was very cryptic about why he was not suing. And ultimately, on 2 weeks later, on February 20th, 2023, James did this whole farewell address in his office, where he went. He said one of the complaints was that I threw a Christmas party at a wedding venue. I've never been married. It's like, yeah, you were engaged. See, that's what it was at that moment where I was so plagued with cognitive dissonance, because it's like, I love my friend, I've always been loyal to him. I don't really know what's going on. But when he said that in the President's Day speech, I've never been married. What are they talking about? Gaslighting? I'm like, this is like if we had, for instance, one of our investigative journalists had uncovered that a certain politician, had or a candidate was
did the same thing, used a personal event venue and repurposed it as a campaign venue so that they could have the campaign money reimburse it. James would call that content. Okay. So when he's up there gaslighting and also saying a number of things that I'm sorry, were not true. That's where I was like, I got into this business to tell the truth. Not to misinform, not to disinform. And that's where the line in the sand, to accidentally plug his new movie, was drawn. And and what's most unfortunate is that none of the people who followed him to OMGA, because he created this group called OMGA, while he was still an employee at Project Veritas, by the way, because he was never ousted, he was never fired. I mean, he was months later in May, but not according to the narrative that he was ousted in February. He remained on the payroll of Project Veritas for 3 months, and the only reason he was ultimately fired in May was because he had already 2 months prior created OMGA, O'Keefe Media Group, to compete with his own organization. And so, of course, we had a number of journalists who left Project Veritas to join him at OMGA, and because it was the cool thing to do at the time, and they were not apparently impressed by facts or interested or curious about what the facts of the situation were. They just were, well, this is what all the people on Twitter are saying to do, is follow James. This is what, the popular thing to do. I don't want Tim Pool saying mean things about me. So they all, of course, followed James. But the people who stuck with Project Veritas because of that original mission to tell the truth, to be devoted to the truth no matter what, no matter how unpopular, that team that James Lalino and I led for that last 6 months, the ones who stayed, while we had our, people who had idolized us for the past 10 years, calling us traitors, calling us sellouts, calling us Pfizer bought and paid for, backstabbers. We continued to do our jobs. We exposed groomers. We exposed pedophiles. We exposed corrupt politicians. We exposed, we had the Mayor Adams story a year before. Now it's all coming. Yeah. But we had that scoop a year ago. No one cared. Our audience didn't care because they were like, "Where's James? Where's James?" No James, no Project Veritas. So basically, they idolized him.
Yeah, it became about personality over principles.
I believe that the same thing can happen to the Trump, because there are a lot of Trumpsters that will support him no matter what. Yeah. Even if he gets elected on November, right? He's still a man, so he can go full bananas.
Yes.
And lots of people just going to stand by him. That's not a good thing.
That's true. Fortunately, in my opinion, he has not gone bananas. But yes, you're right. What this unveiled to me is that there is this cult of personality on the right. When we started in 2009, the cult of personality was around Obama. Yes, it was around the idol worship, the idolatry was a phenomenon of the left. And of course it carried its way up till through its. To this day, it's like, oh, well, Stephen Colbert says that I should get vaccinated, so therefore I should get vaccinated. Or, so-and-so says to hate Trump, so therefore must hate Trump.
Taylor Swift says we have to
Taylor, there you go. That was like a left, and conservatives were about principles over personalities. Well, there is unfortunately this, and this is coming from someone who actually cares about James more than any of these sycophants and these clout chasers and these people, these enablers, and who don't actually care about him. This is coming from his actual friend, who actually likes him, actually cares about him.
Do you keep in touch with him?
No, because we haven't talked since.
Since he left?
Yeah.
What do you think has changed in his attitude? That was the breakup?
What has changed?
What was the reason he changed that way? Was it the breakup?
I don't. But between him and Project Veritas.
Yeah. I mean, so he started acting differently, right? Asking for money, asking to send an email to ask for 20,000.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna like litigate the details of it too much because I don't know. All I know, it's between him and God. All I know is that the narrative that he manufactured during that time, during February 2023 on, was not accurate, and he hurt a lot of people. A lot of people who just wanted to do the right thing. Matt Tiermond, who was 86th from the War Room, who was a frequent guest on the War Room, who was friendly with Jack Posobiec. Jack Posobiec, I believe, was closer to Matt Tiermond than he ever was to James O'Keefe. Steve Bannon, who I used to work for, who I admired, and was closer to Matt Tiermond than he was to James O'Keefe. 86th Matt Tiermond from the War Room after this all happened, and went along with the narrative that Matt Tiermond was a backstabber who, betrayed James O'Keefe and ousted him and was possibly bought off by Pfizer. How do you realize that's an actual person whose life you're destroying? And the death threats that Matt Tiermond got, he got actual credible death threats that he had to report to the FBI.
Really?
Nazi gangs in Miami, according to what Matt told me. I read the people who threw him under the bus without questioning, without asking, just asking. Tim Pool did not call any of us. He did not even attempt to get the other side of the story. He just went along with it. Well, this is,
why? He just wanted to break the news?
It was the popular thing to do. It was the popular thing to do. Personalities over principles.
So the worst thing that can ever happen to a country is a civil war, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the other bad thing that can happen to a party or to the side, like to the left or to the right or to the center, libertarians, is when the left fight each other, the right fight each other. So this is what basically what's happening on the right, right?
Well, what's funny is a lot of these people would probably accuse me of fomenting division, on the right here. For me, it's all about if we don't budge from principles, then we have nothing to worry about because we're supposed to be principles against these horrible personalities on the left. That's what united us is principles. Mm-hmm. And if it's no longer principles uniting us, but it's personalities, then we're no different from the left. Do you know what I mean?
So it basically have to be facts over emotions.
Right.
So, well, once again, lies, lots of lies. If the audience heard the truth from James and from, for instance, someone from the Project Veritas, and they would lay out the facts. This is what happened. Yeah. Now you do your decision.
Right.
Who do you support and whose fault was that?
Right. Well, what's funny is none of this was ever supposed to be public. This was supposed to just be a quietly resolved matter between James O'Keefe and the board and the employees.
There's no way he was going to retire and resign.
He said, no one wanted him to resign. No one wanted him gone. That's one of the great myths.
So they wanted him.
They literally said in the recording
2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, 2 weeks, but then there was an indefinite suspension while pending an audit. And even someone said, one of the board members said, and because James, did ask, he said, okay, but what's the plan? If I'm suspended, what's the plan for Project Veritas in my absence? And one board member actually said, this is a very good point. He said, well, to James's credit, because James assembled this army, this guerrilla army of investigative journalists and leaders, and just one of the many brilliant things that James did that no one else in the history of journalism has ever accomplished. He created this infrastructure. He put people, leaders like me and James Lalino and Dan Strack and some other people I won't name, very good leaders, very talented. We for the last 6 months of Project Veritas, in James's absence, we managed to have probably one of actually the most consistent outputs of story. I think every week we were breaking a story because our journalists were, and our producers, Pam Brown, Callan Erickson, we were so laser focused, had our heads down, and were just laser focused on the field, turning out story after story, credible stories that would have been, that our fans would have been like, oh my God, this is amazing. But instead, because they didn't have James O'Keefe presenting it, and that's not all. He wasn't just a presenter; he was the founder. But my point is, like, those stories were just as good on the same level.
No one cared.
Yeah, anymore. But James, instead of just simply saying, like, and he even said in the board recording, you listen to yourself. He says, "Yeah, I do need help. I think it is. He was agreeable to getting help and getting some, taking some mental health R&R, which a lot of us need. I've needed that in my time." Where I've needed some time off just to clear my mind, and he was actually thankful, expressed gratitude for that in this recording. Look, I wouldn't still be talking about this a year later but we were all, look, James will be the first to tell you, because one of my jobs at Project Veritas was we had Retracto, the correction alpaca, which was this alpaca, this stuffed little alpaca that was a creation of Andrew Breitbart, where we would ambush, do this, what we called SIs, which are spontaneous interviews, where we would go up to someone, a journalist who had to retract something they had said, some lie that they had published about us, about Project Veritas. And it was either me or James Lalino or James O'Keefe. We would ambush this person, whether it was, someone who wrote for Politico, what was his name, for Politico, whatever. And we would hand deliver them this alpaca, this stuffed alpaca, as which they earned from having to retract some lie that they told about us. And one of the last Retracto alpaca videos I did was with James Lalino in CPAC 2021. And what was his name? It's not coming to me, but this was over something that he had misprinted about us in 2012. We were all about correcting the record.
9 years.
9 years. It was like something he had, but it was like he was at CPAC. Oh, what was his name? It's actually a guy that I really like. What's his name? Washington Post. I forgot what his, anyway. But his name will come to me, but I confronted him and on camera, and I said, "Hey, we owe you 2 Retracto alpacas because you had to do 2 retractions for lying about us. One was in 2012, I think one was in 2014 or 2017 or whatever. But we were all about correcting the record, no matter how long the record had gone uncorrected, and so that's why that's why I'm still, and for as long as people ask me questions, it's not like I stew about this, it's not like I obsess over this, but for as long as people ask me questions about it, I'm going to tell the truth. It's not popular to say.
Why did you leave?
Oh, I was laid off by Hannah Giles along with 20 other people over a Zoom call by the HR director that Hannah Giles didn't have the integrity or fortitude to show up as. That's a whole nother story. So Hannah Giles, okay, just to summarize, Hannah Giles was the prostitute in the original Acorn videos that James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles went to these Acorn offices. So she was sort of, in a way, the founding godmother of undercover video journalism. She sort of co-pioneered, and by her own account, it was her idea to come up with the Acorn story, and she supposedly pitched it to James O'Keefe, and James O'Keefe was like, "Oh, I could be the pimp." So anyway, but she kind of disappeared after the Acorn thing, kind of retreated into private life, and hadn't been heard of. And James O'Keefe was, he kind of carried the mantle, but when Acorn happened, it was James O'Keefe, Hannah Giles. The names were synonymous because they were the two, masterminds behind that video.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, so when James left, no one wanted him gone. Again, no one wanted him gone, but he just left. He refused to talk to his staff. He refused to leave. He claimed he was gagged, which he was not. He formed his own organization. He started poaching donors, poaching employees that were willing to cave into peer pressure. So we kept our heads down, and we kept on delivering story after story after story. But our donations were drying up because of the narrative that the people still at Project Veritas are backstabbers. They stole the company from James or whatever. They're actually the bravest people, the people who actually stuck by principles when it was the least popular thing to do. There was absolutely nothing to gain financially, personally, by staying with Project Veritas, and everything to lose. But anyway, I digress. But what we were being told is we need a face. We need a new face because people love a face. Used to be content was king, and James always said content is king, but we needed an actual king because the content was not king. No one actually cared that we were exposing pedophiles or crooked politicians or whatever. They didn't care. They wanted to know who was going to present, who was the face, that was going to present. So we're like, okay, well, who better than Hannah Giles? It was kind of a brilliant jujitsu move at the time. Let's bring back the OG, the original gangster of undercover journalism along with James. Because if there's no PV, if there's no Project Veritas without James O'Keefe, well, guess what? There's no James O'Keefe without Hannah Giles. So we brought back Hannah Giles. Long story short, and this itself is worthy of its own book. But
maybe
Hannah Giles
on Netflix.
Yeah, Hannah Giles turned out to be a con artist and just a total. I don't know. To this day, I don't know if it was just total incompetence or malice, but she completely whatever. The company was on its way. On its last legs, it did everything to accelerate its demise and tear us apart. And she ended
by doing what?
Oh God, everything. So well, first of all, she
became the CEO.
She became the CEO, which the way
that
she was. Well, yeah, the board. It was the board was like they offered her a. This is a whole nother story that I haven't even told in a while, but the board, I thought it was a brilliant idea, and Hannah and I were always friends. We kept in touch over the years, and I knew her kids, I knew her husband, and I liked her, but they just wanted her to be a face, but she insisted, and she claimed that she had her own donor network that she was going to bring to the table, her own Texas donor network that were loyal to her, and she had all these connections and to sources and law enforcement and military that were going to give us all these really groundbreaking stories, and it was like it seemed too good. It was too good to be true.
That was the big lie.
She said she was going to bring, but then she started having these. Once she was like, "Well, my donors aren't going to give unless you make me CEO." Okay, Hannah, you're CEO. Well, but for 6 months, for a 6-month trial period, and then she's like, or 3 month, 90 day or something, 90 day, and then she was like agreeable to that. But then in a board meeting, she's like, "Oh yeah, my donors, they're not. They said that they're afraid to donate unless you make me permanent CEO." Because they don't know if I could save this company, and then 90 days from now, you guys could say, "Okay, thanks, Hannah, bye." And the board members were like, "Hannah, why would we do that? If you save this company, why would we ask you to leave after on day 91? It didn't make any sense." And then she claimed that she was getting death threats, and
from who?
She did. It was like I don't know. She completely made it up out of thin air. So she bullied the board members into like agreeing to all her demands, and then she has like, oh, it was like, okay, Hannah, where's the money that you're this donor network of yours is supposed to give us? And she's like, yeah, well, they're a little troubled by Matt Tierman being on the board, so they're not going to give until Matt Tierman's gone. Okay, Matt Tierman resigned. Okay, and Hannah,
Really?
now, yeah. Now what's
You
the
were so
excuse?
desperate.
Yeah. Because we had, maybe like a 3-month runway at that point. We just wanted to do journalism. We just wanted, whatever. So Hannah was like, yeah, and then she was like, oh yeah, my donors don't want to give until, and then she started saying like certain guys in production, like who were bad mouthing her or something, and she was like, until they're gone.
So
and
it
it's
became
like, wait,
personal.
what do these donors even know about? I'm not going to say the names, but like, so she meant it to turn into this vendetta. And also she was getting in the way of the journalist. She was micromanaging the journalism too. We had, for instance, like Alyssa Dean had this really blockbuster story about the student loans, the way that the Biden administration was circumventing the Supreme Court ruling on his student loan program. And she had this undercover scoop, and Hannah Giles, who I think had it out for Alyssa Dean, because Alyssa Dean years ago had also exposed someone that Hannah Giles was friends with. That's the speculation, that Hannah Giles hated Alyssa Dean, one of our journalists, because of a story that she had done on someone years ago that Hannah was friendly to. She completely did everything she could to stall the story from seeing the light of day. And until ultimately there was no way to, we ended up publishing it. It's a great story, but it was, she was just stonewalling, micromanaging, coming up with, gaslighting, turning people against each other. It was one of the weirdest experiences of my life. And ultimately, and firing some of our best people too. So anyway, and then ultimately, and I was her friend, and I was part of the reason she got hired. I didn't intend for her to be CEO, much less permanent CEO, but I like the idea of having Hannah Giles come out of the woodwork to be the face of Project Veritas. I didn't know she was such a bungling klutz and such a horrible person, but but I was one of her advocates, and when she had HR terminate about 20 employees, including me, over an unexpected Zoom, without notice, without severance, on August 17th, 2023. And so that was the story of that.
What was
it's funny because so much time has passed. I'm doing great. I'm sharing all these stories kind of like with just, baffled amusement in retrospect. I'm not kvetching. I'm not aggrieved.
Well, you don't seem like a victim. What was the salary of hers when she was a CEO?
She was $250,000, I believe, is what she was making, which was about half what James had been making at the time. And she apparently was kvetching about that, according to I don't know that for sure. I just heard that she was complaining about that.
But prior to her return to Project Veritas, what was she doing?
Oh, who knows? Supposedly, so she, because and we all believed her, because why would, we didn't have time to actually consider that she was lying about a lot of this stuff. So she claimed that, she had started this, that she and her husband had started this fellowship called the American Phoenix Foundation, and that they had trained, hundreds of investigative journalists who are now working in mainstream media.
Undercover.
And I don't know. And apparently and you can Google American Phoenix Foundation. Apparently that was and she brought on Ben Wetmore, who was James O'Keefe's mentor back in the day, and was working with her and helped her start the American Phoenix Foundation, I think in 2014, 2015, which I believe the Attorney General of Texas, don't quote me, but anyway, the American Phoenix Foundation was a C3 that came under investigation for supposedly looting donor funds, and it was apparently this was a serial pattern of them kind of preying on these 501c3s and these donors and bilking. I don't want to get too in the weeds because I don't want to but you can Google American Phoenix Foundation, and this is apparently there's a pattern of some of this behavior.
Do you like writing?
Yeah, I love writing.
So there's a format called 110 pages. Write a screenplay for that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That has to be a Netflix TV show.
Oh yeah. Well,
That's an incredible
believe
story.
me. Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm a screenwriter. I love, I've always thought of doing, sort of like kind of what Sorkin did with Facebook, kind of a Sorkin style, or All the President's Men, type of. I wanted to write a screenplay about the Democracy Partners investigation. I may one day do that, because that in itself is a movie, and a pot boiler.
So Project Veritas exists till this day. Do they?
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know. It's a shell. It's like. I don't know how it exists, but they have a Twitter account. They're still tweeting. They're still putting out some content. They've had a few good stories. I don't know how. No, it's a mystery to us all. We talk, me and the 30 other, ex-employees, who became such a tight-knit family in the last 6 months, because we all and by the way, having been with Project Veritas, the longest serving person at Project Veritas next to James O'Keefe out of anyone for 15 years, I saw generations and generations. I saw every single every single person who came in and out the doors of Project Veritas. And by the way, it's a lot, because that was one of our problems that the board was trying to resolve, is that this what's the term where you have so many people coming in and out, and the average lifespan of an employee was like 6 months. Anyway, wait, where was I going with that?
What year was the pinnacle of Project Veritas?
I would say our peak was, we were really peaking with that Pfizer story. Yeah, we were a $23 million company, I believe, that was our peak.
And how many employees max?
We had 70 employees, I think, at the time.
So she fired basically almost a half.
Okay, well, I think so after James left, and it's funny because he didn't leave, but he wasn't fired. He was claiming he was ousted, but he was still in the anyway. So when James left,
so he stayed on the payroll for 3 months.
Yeah, well, remember, his pay was suspended, but he was still Project Veritas was still paying his legal benefits and his medical benefits. Oh, that's another thing that Hannah Giles did in her last week, and this was part of the reason I might have been fired, was because and I was board ombudsman. I had been appointed board ombudsman to represent the employees to the board. So I would sit on these board meetings in this last few months. And one of the things that Hannah did was, because we were all, and by the way, I got sued a number of times at Project Veritas, but I didn't care when I got sued or deposed or I had to go to court, because I always knew that, we had...
The company is going to cover this process.
Okay. And we had great, we had our own personal Johnny Cochrans who were just, would kick Johnny Cochran's ass. And, we had the best lawyers. And Jared Eddy, we had really great people. So I never were, in fact, we won every single case that was brought against us or that we brought, except for the Democracy Partners, because it was tried by a Clinton-appointed judge in D.C. with Clinton voting jurors.
Plain coincidence.
Yeah,
that's just,
that was the one case we lost. Yes, yeah, and that in itself was a great anyway. And that was the trial over my story about the Clinton campaign, the bird doggers. Anyway,
so
where was I going? Wait,
Hannah, with the payroll and the expenses of.
Oh yeah, so Hannah, just we were running out of money, and she knew. But so Hannah, in this board meeting that I was supposed to be in every board meeting, but there was an emergency board meeting called, or no, a special board meeting for special purposes that I was not allowed in. I remember storming into Hannah's office and being like, Hannah, what is this I hear about a board meeting tonight? Why did I not get the invitation? She's like, oh, it's a special board meeting for special purposes. Okay, but I represent the employees, and you, Hannah, voted for me. You and you, Joe, you all voted for me to be the board ombudsman representing the employees, and you're not letting me in. And they're like, oh, we're not going to be talking about employee-related issues. You don't need to be there. I'm like, okay, well, what do I find out from Tom tells me the next day? What was that board meeting about? It was about removing the indemnification of journalists without them even knowing.
What is that?
Indemnification, indemnifying the journalists. So if our undercover journalists, we had undercover journalists in the field working on that very day who trusted that if they were arrested, if they were sued, if they were, that Project Veritas would have their back. Hannah Giles voted to remove, or I think she abstained from voting, but all the board members voted, they voted to remove the indemnification from the journalists, and she didn't even bother to tell the journalists.
So it means the company is not going to cover the
legal expense. If you get arrested, you're on your own. If you get sued, you're on your own. So, Hannah, and when I found this out, and I was leading a meeting of journalists, and I was like, okay, guys, I have something I need to tell you that I just found out. Hannah has, and I have a statement. I have this, and I think Libby Emmons covered this story because I gave her the scoop. This is back in August of 2023. So she, I read the statement to these employees saying, essentially, you guys are on your own because Hannah has removed your indemnification, and she didn't bother to tell anyone. So, and then 2 hours later, I was fired. I don't know if it's related, but
Succession, right? Yeah. Billions, Game of Thrones. Is nothing in comparison to this. This is true story.
Yeah, this is. I mean, yeah. I'm only scraping.
Hey
the
guys from
too.
HBO, Netflix, call the guy. Pay him $5 million.
Right.
You're good with $5 million for this story?
To
be an executive producer.
And
a screenwriter.
Yeah, it's so funny because and I'm only talking about like the Project Veritas intrigue. Like these are the kind of the investigations we did, the undercover investigations we did were just so chock full of intrigue. And but the thing itself, the institution itself, the way it crumbled is just such a fascinating story. And there's so much.
That's good. It's like 5 seasons
there. Yeah.
5 seasons.
Yes.
12 episodes each. Amazing. For 5 years, you're going to have a lot of job to do.
I'd like to write a book about it. I mean, the stories I could tell you from the Breitbart days, from the early GarageBand
We're
days
going to get to
Veritas.
Breitbart.
But the way that it ended, it really sucks because, James O'Keefe, I was slicing an avocado this morning, and the avocado was so hard that the knife slipped and I cut my finger. That's why I keep licking my finger. What James O'Keefe, what he created was something that was really Project Veritas. And part of the reason I tell these stories is because I want people to remember. I want people to remember what James created, what James and Matt Tiermond and Joe Barton and I was instrumental in helping create, and Andrew Breitbart and Hannah Giles. This was something that the lifespan, the 14-year lifespan of Project Veritas, and in not just in its Veritas Visuals iteration. That is a story that's a legacy that I want to be remembered, that I want people to remember. It wasn't, and the brave souls, the undercover journalists who produced these stories most of whose names will never be known. And frankly, even those that are, whose names have been published, people still think that it was James O'Keefe personally going in and doing, and to his credit, he created this organization, and he pioneered this craft.
And he went on all the podcasts representing the Project Veritas. He was the face of the Project Veritas.
Right. Yeah. And that was kind of a liability too, because like when you concentrate all of Project Veritas's credibility into one phase, it was a very different style than Andrew Breitbart, for instance. Andrew Breitbart, when I worked for him, it's almost like he didn't know, but it's almost like he knew that his time was going to be short, because he did everything he could to make sure that Breitbart, even though it was eponymous, even though it was literally named after him, that he made sure that Breitbart would always be here, that Breitbart was not just Andrew Breitbart, that it was Dana Lash, that it was Larry O'Connor, that it was John Kahn, that it was Christian Hartsock, that it was Joel Pollack, that was Ben Shapiro, that, he made sure that to him, like I remember sometimes he would be getting interviewed by Laura Ingraham or, and over a story that I was involved in, he would be like, it wasn't just me, it was Christian Hartsock. It was, he wanted to make sure that it was not all about him, and that, if something were to happen to him, that Breitbart would live on. I tend to think James did the exact opposite. He wanted Project Veritas to fail in his absence.
He was mad. He was angry. He was mad. But the facts are the facts. You can't neglect them.
Yeah.
He did what he did. So right now we have Project Veritas is somewhere over there in Twitter, right? On X. They're doing something. You have OMG, O'Keefe Media Group. They're doing some great stories. Line in the Sand just premiered on TCN.
I haven't seen it, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. And you've got Stephen Crowder, right? He just exposed
my God, yeah.
Varna.
Yeah, that was a humongous story.
And
with the Crowder thing, yeah.
Do you think he was inspired by James O'Keefe?
Well, I know the people who did that story.
The Varna stuff?
Yeah.
Tell the story. What do you know?
Well, I know who the people involved in. I'm not going to say any more, but to answer your question.
But that was huge.
Yeah.
So my question is, every time I watch the Project Veritas, everything that they did, right? The Varna stuff, the Pfizer stuff. Why do people talk? Just shut up.
Because we're so affable. because we there, and this is this is the tradecraft that I taught, that I trained, was, our Bible was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Amazing.
Yeah. Become the most interesting man in the room by making the other person the most interesting man in the room. There's a certain way to open people up. And look, when you're infiltrating the left, you are always, most of the time, dealing with clinical narcissists. The reason why the left operates, I think that people let them off the hook when they say that they're money driven. I think money is a more admirable. It's too admirable a goal. I think these people are motivated primarily by narcissism. That's why it's all virtue signaling. They want to brag. They want every opportunity to brag about how virtuous they are, and what social justice. What beautiful social justice warriors they are. And that was one of my tactics to investigate voter fraud in 2020 was I would get in front of these people, I would these groups, these community organization groups, and I would get into them to a point where I would make the case to them that, look, the people who have the most to lose in a Trump presidency are the people who don't have a voice. The people who don't have a say, the people whose land we are living on, that we have lived on their land for centuries, and they don't have a voice because they don't have papers. I made the case that not only is voter fraud morally excusable, but it's immoral not to commit voter fraud when the risk is Trump. You know, we had what we called Mau Mau. This is a technique, is Mau Mauing, is virtue signaling, out liberaling, that out virtue, making them feel that if they're not out woking them, like if you're not willing to go, and it's not like we were inducing them to self-incriminate, but if there was voter fraud going on or shenanigans going on, we created a social dynamic wherein they would definitely want to brag about it. If they were committing voter fraud, they would want to tell you, because you're creating, you create this pressure where this social pressure where Scott Foval couldn't wait to tell me about the dirty tricks they were doing, because I was telling him, and my whole my whole script was that I was this consultant, and I had a client who was a wealthy progressive philanthropist who had made a bunch of money off real estate. He was plagued with white guilt, and he wanted to and he hated voter ID. He thought it's racist, and he wanted to check his privilege by re-enfranchising undocumented workers by creating a shell company that would issue them employer issued IDs that they could show to the polls, and we could bust them from polling place to polling place so they could vote over and over again. Because back to my Mau Mau, the people who have the most to lose in a Trump presidency are the immigrants, the people who don't have a voice, and so I'm Mau Mauing him with this verbal virtuosity, and as Thomas Sowell would put it, and I'm telling him, like, he has my client Charles Roth has this brilliant plan to re-enfranchise undocumented citizens, and we just need, if he can, you create shell companies, issue them employer issued IDs that they can show at the polling places that require IDs. Well, they just need proof of residency, so we just need Milwaukee addresses to print on their pay stubs. So since we're canvassing all these inner city neighborhoods, and there's so many foreclosed homes and abandoned homes, can we just have the canvassers log the addresses of foreclosed homes so we can print them on the pay stubs, so that our re-enfranchisees can show them, at the polling places, and they can vote. Bro, they can have a say in it. Yeah.
You laid out the whole plan for the 2024. So what did you do? You were supposed to expose them.
Yeah. So Scott Foval tells me, that's brilliant, and I know who your client is. And I'm like, really? I just made all this shit up in my head earlier that morning. But okay, Scott Foval, who's my client? He's like, well, Bob Creamer comes up with a lot of this stuff. And so I'm like, so who's Bob Creamer? And it turns out he's one of the top advisors to the Clinton campaign. And I'm like, really? What kind of stuff does Bob Creamer come up with? And he's like, well, we send mentally ill people to Trump rallies to incite violence. So, so to answer your question, this is how we get people to talk. We get them excited. We tell them what we're doing, what people we know are doing, and all these great things they're doing to save democracy. What are you doing? What are you doing? For the Google story, Jen Janai was the head of machine learning fairness. We created a fake charity, that paired and I reached out to Jen Janai, and I was like, Miss Janai, you're a very successful, inspiring woman in tech. We have this charity called Two-Step Solutions, where we're pairing successful women in tech with young girls of color who are
to my ears.
who are have been pushed out into the exurbs by the tech boom, and so it's a sort of a reparative effort, and which inspires the guilt, where she's like this white, rich, privileged woman who's like, ooh, a way for me to pay back, So I would say, we're pairing. It's a mentor program. So we just ask, a half hour a month that you mentor a young girl of color. And she's like, ooh, how lovely. I would love to be a part of this.
By just mentioning women of color is racism.
Girl of color. Yeah, exactly.
This racism.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how I got her to go to dinner with me, and then I recorded her telling me all about, what they're doing to manipulate the algorithms to prevent another Trump situation in 2020. So you play to their ego. These people, like I said, are clinical narcissists, and they love to brag. If you spin what they're doing, if you make the case to them that not only is voter fraud or stealing the election rigging, not only is it morally acceptable, but it's immoral not to commit it when the stakes are so high, you'll get them telling you everything. That you'll get them telling you where who started the Chicago fire. You'll get them telling you where Jimmy Hoffa is buried.
What's shocking to me is after all those stories that were exposed, they still do not shut up. They still talk and talk and talk. Mm-hmm. After the Pfizer story, Jay Varna still talks.
Yeah. But that's another
he just
thing.
can't help himself.
It's the Pauline Kael complex, where these people have no idea. They're in such a bubble that the idea of Trump supporters, the existence, it's still like an alien phenomenon to them, an extraterrestrial phenomenon. These people are not, they can't, it's why, here in LA, for instance, most people you meet, most liberals you meet will assume you're a liberal. They'll just, wherever you go, they just assume they're surrounded by fellow liberals. The idea of an actual, I know Trump supporters exist, but those are like, in flyover country, or those are, so these people are very unsuspecting.
Out of 100% of investigations that you did, how many percentage-wise were women and men talking to those guys?
That's a very interesting question. That's a very good question. I think most were women. I think off the top of my head.
Just
I don't
pretty
know.
Women
maybe 50. Maybe 50-50. I don't know. Actually, I don't know. Actually, that's a very good question.
What was the investigation that you were mostly surprised of? Like, did we pull that off? How did we manage to do that? What was shocking to
These
you?
are very good questions. These are questions I haven't been asked before. Let me think about that. Where I was surprised at what they were telling me. Well, I can tell you, I could not believe what Scott Foval was telling me. I almost was like, is he like, I remember in the middle of him telling me on this, and I gave him the whole pitch about my client's surrogate voter scheme. And it was at a bar in Milwaukee at a party the SEIU was throwing. And I remember asking him, or I remember him telling me all this amazing, giving me just, it was like, he was like this slot machine of content. And it was like, ding, 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 ding. I was like, I asked him if I could run to the restroom just so I could check to make sure my cameras were. And I remember saying, Scott, before you say that next amazing thing you're going to tell me, let me run to the restroom. And I go to the restroom and I'm like, please have been recording. Please have been recording. I see the red light. I'm like, yes. And then I go back out there and he's like, oh, I was wondering where you went. So anyway, another thing we did was that and it was just amazing. I could not believe it. And I remember going home. Now, what's amazing about that night was I had gone to Wisconsin on a tip to investigate vote bribery. Supposedly we got a tip that they were picking up like homeless people, giving them bags of chips to vote Democratic or whatever. That turned out not to be the case. And the way that I found out and I rode in so many different vans, getting people to the polls, doing the knock and drag thing, and infiltrated half a dozen lefty groups. And Voces de la Frontera, Citizen Action, YES, the SEIU. And anyway, I ran the bait, the surrogate voter scheme bait on almost all of them, and they were like, "Yeah, we could try to keep things above the board." And none of them took the bait. And then I was like, "Oh, okay, this might be my first." This was, I think, my 8th trip to Wisconsin, and every single trip before I had gotten blockbuster stories, but this was probably going to be my first. This was April of 2016. I was like, you know what? I guess I'm going home empty-handed from Wisconsin for the first time, because the next morning I had my flight. Well, anyway, after a day of being, of riding around with the SEIU all day and them not taking my bait, and doing everything above board, everything, which is good. I'm like, good. I'm pleasantly surprised that they're not committing,
It's actually good.
It's actually a good thing. When I don't have a job to do, that's actually a good thing. So, but I was like, yeah, bummer for me though, because I don't, whatever, spent all this money, on hotels and food for me to be out here. Oh, well. And I was exhausted. So I just want to get back to my hotel, get on get rested, get packed, and then fly home the next morning. And the SEIU, when they're dropping me off my car, they're like, oh, we're having a primary election viewing party. It was April 5th. So they had the Wisconsin primary. And they said, we're having a at this bar if you want to come. And I was like, damn it. How do I turn down an invitation from the SEIU to watch this? So anyway, I was like, okay, I'll go. And first person I see when I walk into the bar is Scott Foval, who I had met briefly a week before in some Voces de la Frontera office. And I'm like, I'm going to do this one last time. So I run the script by him about the philanthropist clients and the surrogate voter scheme, and he gives me and I remember that night getting back to the hotel at 3 a.m. and writing my after action report, which are usually like 1 to 2 pages. It was 35-page after action report.
35 pages?
35 pages. And I typed out every single thing he told me word for word and turned it in and went to sleep.
Even though you had the record, you had to write a report?
Oh, yeah. That's one thing I don't miss about life at Project Veritas is after going, undercover, you had to turn in an after action report within 24 hours of going in the field, which basically meant, as exhausted as you were from getting out in the field, as much as you want to just go to sleep, most of us had to stay up. When we got back to our hotels, we'd have to stay up writing an after action report, because otherwise we'd have James bugging us, like, what happened?
Listen to the tape.
The next morning. Yeah. Well, right, but the tapes were hours and hours long, so the Freddie who wouldn't want to have us turn in hours of footage, and this is like several hours because we had our button cameras, we had our coffee cup cameras, we had our purse cameras, we had our we had so many different cameras, and then backup audio that we would send it over, and Freddie's not going to sit there and be like, listen to everything. We had to have an after action report that told them what time codes to listen to.
Have you ever had a situation when you had good content, but the mic wasn't turned on?
Yeah, this one time, this was terrible. I went to the San Francisco Union, the San Francisco Teachers Union, and I had this whole story about how I was here because my friend was a teacher and he was so afraid to come in, but he's afraid because he beat up a kid and he just wants to know, is the union going to protect him if this kid starts talking? And I had this union official telling me, well, who's to say that he punched the kid? Maybe the kid walked into his fist. Maybe, I'm like,
they said so?
Yeah. It was like brilliant content. And unfortunately, my camera didn't, I remember going to the bathroom afterwards and my camera, it didn't record any of it.
Why?
These cameras, I'm telling you, there was Murphy's Law. It was
something bad that happened.
It was the early days where we learned the hard way, always have like backup cameras. That's why ideal situation, you're having dinner with someone and you have like they don't realize there's like a press junket's worth of cameras on them. I had my key fob camera, I have my charger port camera. I was paranoid.
Ray-Bans right now.
But I that was a case where I did my backup audio. I did at least have my backup audio was recording, and that story was published. But we ended up revisiting. But I ended up going back, having a second meeting with that union official, with my actual teacher friend, who so we ended up getting video camera footage. But yeah, that certainly happened where we would get content and then find out, it wasn't recording.
That's crazy. It doesn't matter. Maybe the kid was the one that punched you.
Oh yeah, no, because the whole elicitation was because we wanted to find out if teachers unions were willing to cover up physical abuse of children, and so my story was like, hey, my friend's a teacher in the district. I promised I wouldn't say his name. I told him, I told him, I told him the union's here to protect you, so you can come in yourself, but he's just paranoid. He doesn't want to. He told me, no, I don't know if they're going to call the cops on me right when I admit to it. And so I'm almost preconditioning them to say, oh yeah, of course he can trust us, because it's me basically saying, I know that my friend can trust you. My friend's just paranoid. And so I'm kind of, making them feel predisposed to reassure me. Yeah, of course. And then I tell them, yeah, this guy beat the shit out of this 5-year-old kid. And them saying, oh, well, okay, well, we don't, who knows, who's to say, if the kid speaks up, and by the way, the kid has a loud mouth. And I got this union official saying, well, kids lie, and who's to say that he punched the kid? Maybe the kid walked into his fist,
That's funny, but that's not funny at all. What?
It's kind of funny, at the expense of the evil, at the expense of the butt of the joke is the malice that we were reporting on.
But that's the left, right?
Yes.
Do you have anything from the right side?
Oh yeah. God, yeah. So I got a Republican staffer fired because he told me his boss was going to vote a certain way on the export-import extension because of his financial connections. This was June 15th, 2015. I remember the day that Trump announced his run for election. We had that. We had some of our other journalists had a story on where a woman who, what was her name? She was a MAGA. She was she was working for a MAGA campaign, and we got her arrested for voter fraud. A MAGA Republican campaign. She was, I don't remember, I wasn't on the story, but and it's been so long, but I just remember she was doing some kind of illegal ballot.
So Project Veritas was not aiming only to the left.
No. In fact, and we did some other. I got a story that I did back in 2014. Mike Ellis, who is the president of the Wisconsin State Senate, retired, announced he was running for re-election. But I did a video where I caught up with him in a bar, and he, on this video, he's talking about coordinating with the super PACs illegally, and then we released the tape, and he ended up. The day after we released the tape, he was running for re-election. He had been in the Wisconsin State Senate since 1970. And the day after we released our story, he announced his retirement.
Total coincidence.
Yeah. He said it was he said this was the reason. He's like, he's just,
You can only imagine for how many years he did this shit.
Who knows? Yeah. So, we were a 501c3. We were nonpartisan. We're non-political. It's just if we're going to go after Republicans, the media, Leviathan kind of has a head start, and much more well. But we would like to go into the dark corners where no one else is looking, where people are not pointing their flashlights.
What do people don't understand about the investigative journalism? Well, they have no idea what it is like.
Well, I think a lot of people don't realize that the power is in their hands. Anyone can do it. Not anyone. You have to have a certain degree of skill and talent. But look, it wasn't always as elaborate as, the Democracy Partners investigation was 6 months. 6 months. It all started in that bar in Milwaukee. But, then in order to corroborate that Scott Foval was telling the truth about who he was and who his mentor Bob Creamer was, and Bob Creamer's relation to Hillary Clinton, we had to run the extra mile. We had to cast someone to play my wealthy philanthropist. So we cast someone to go, and I called up Scott Foval, and I was like, hey, my client that I told you about, who has the surrogate voter scheme, Charles Roth is very impressed with the advice you gave me, because Scott Foval was telling me how to pull it off. He's like, oh, you don't want to use you don't want to use buses; they're too easy to trace. You don't want to use rental cars because they don't have Wisconsin license plates. You want to use used auction cars. So I was relaying all this advice he was getting me, relayed to my fictitious client. I tell Scott Foval, I'm like, hey, Charles Roth wants to meet you. In fact, he wants to meet your mentor, Bob Creamer. Can we set up a meeting? And Scott Foval was like, oh yeah, set up a meeting. Now I have to cast a guy to play Charles Roth, and go meet with Bob Creamer. And he meets with Bob Creamer and, starts this friendship with him where he can earn, when it's a whole months long process of earning the trust of Bob Creamer so that we can find out what his bigger plans are and corroborate everything that Scott Foval told me, and also corroborate his relationship with Hillary Clinton, that she knows about it. So, the next step was, how do we get into Bob Creamer's office? Well, what if Charles Roth has a niece who is off for the summer, and needs an internship? Oh, okay. So we come up with that. Now we need to cast someone, Allison Moss, to play the niece and go into, and Bob Creamer hires her to be to be an intern. She sits in on the morning meetings and finds out that Hillary Clinton was very aware of what they were doing. So there's a whole 6-month process, whereas the Washington Post will just say, oh yeah, we heard it from an anonymous source that Trump is a Russian asset, so take our word for it. It's like, look, I got the whole story on April 5th, 2016 in that bar in Milwaukee, but because we're actual journalists who respect our audience and respect, our audience's intelligence, we are going to spend 6 months corroborating all this. Even though it's not just like in print, an anonymous source. No, it's this freaking guy with a face and a name telling me to my button camera about what they get up to. But that's not even enough. We need to corroborate it from, we need to corroborate everything he's saying, and that Hillary Clinton knows about it. So we were exercising journalism ethics to the nth degree in ways that 92% of journalists wouldn't even think. We're too lazy and too
92%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, but my point is, it wasn't always that elaborate. My point is, I was on Sunset Boulevard in June 2017, across the street from CNN in Hollywood, and out walks Van Jones. I was at a cafe. I happened to have my cameras rolling, my coffee cup or whatever button camera or hidden camera I was wearing. I walk across the street, and he's waiting for his Uber. And I say, hey, Van, what do you think of this whole Russia thing? He goes, oh, the Russia thing's a big nothing burger. That was it. Then his Uber arrived. Well, we released that tape, and then there's like internet franchises of nothing burger T-shirts based on that video. All it took was me just like recording. Like it didn't have to be a 6-month elaborate Mission Impossible. It was just me, being in the right place at the right time and having the equipment and asking one question and getting an answer that became national headline news, days later.
What's the most unethical that you did, or the Project Veritas did?
We never did anything unethical.
Come on.
No. We didn't. We're always very vigilant about.
Let's not, without naming the names, right? Women, have they ever had sex for the information?
No. Of course not. No. We had
If they had to, were there any women employees that would go that far just to get the story?
No.
You think so?
Oh no. Because
Okay.
that would be no.
What about men? Because
Oh yeah, totally. No, I'm kidding. No.
you really think that's just too far?
Yeah. Well, there's a certain ethic, and also that's another thing is especially in the Me Too era. There's lines you don't want to cross, but journalistically, ethically, legally, morally, that you just don't want to cross. And we were very vigilant, and our legal team was very vigilant about letting us all know these are lines you cannot cross.
Yeah, but if a couple is just having sex and after sex he tells the story, this amazing story, how he does this and that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's an interesting scenario, an interesting hypothetical situation where it's like, what if you're actually dating someone?
Yeah, you're going on a date,
Yeah.
you're having sex,
Yeah.
and after that, after a few martinis,
Yeah, and then they tell you some things that you might want to, that the public has a right to know about.
of course.
That's an interesting moral dilemma.
I liked how Jay Varna said that he had participated in sex orgies.
Yeah,
It's always something twisted.
right.
Always.
Right.
You not just having sex with my girl or a
Yeah.
boyfriend.
Yeah.
Orgies.
Right.
I remember the story that that came, I want to say 2019 to 2020 from Belgium. Did you hear that story? One of the, I want to say ministers, don't quote me on that. One of the ministers that was a very, how do you call it? That they don't like gays.
Homophobes?
Homophobes?
Yeah.
He was very homophobic. Then he got caught in a sex orgy with 36 other men.
It's kind of gay.
He jumped out the, you think so? He jumped out the window just to run away. 30, I'm sorry, he and 36 others.
36?
Yes. So someone was just watching. Or they were doing some, I don't want to imagine what they were doing. 37 men in one apartment. They were doing some business.
Yeah.
But
It's very, yeah. I mean, yeah.
no comments on that, right? Do you regret on some stories that you did not report because of something has happened to those stories?
Yeah, yeah. There was times where there was moments where, yeah, there was a lot of stories that got shelved for sure. I'm trying to think of some, but there was definitely stories that, for whatever reason, the consensus was that it wasn't a story. And a lot of times stories almost didn't see the light of day because the consensus was this is not a story. But then, for instance, my Google story, like that, the consensus back in New York was, yeah, it was kind of a dud. And I was like very shocked to hear that. But then we released a story and it was humongous. It was one of our biggest stories ever. The Jen Janai story, the story about the Google manipulating the algorithms ahead of the 2020 election. The consensus in New York was like, yeah, we just don't think it's strong enough. And then I was like, what are you talking about? And then we ended up convincing them to publish it. And then they did reluctantly. And then a week later, Donald Trump had James O'Keefe in the White House and had him stand up and congratulated him for the story. And, we had Ted Cruz reading, had a hearing with Google executives on the Senate floor. He was reading a transcript of my dinner with Jen Janai to the faces of these executives, these Google executives. It was a humongous story. But Google censored that story. But by the time they had censored it, Donald Trump Jr. had already tweeted the embed code. So, and just on the basis of that, it became one of our most watched stories. So yeah, there were times when a story almost didn't see the light of day, and there's probably stories that we didn't publish, for various reasons that could have been blockbusters. Who knows? But there was also stories that we thought would be huge that were duds. I know James and my favorite story that was from 2012, when it was a story I did, where I got these union guys, these AFL-CIO guys. I told them that my partner and I were we had this business where we just dug holes and filled them back up again with the same dirt, and we were just looking to unionize and get subsidies to do what we do. It was hilarious. It was like, you guys know we just dig holes and fill them back up with the dirt we just took out of the ground. They're like, yeah, you dig a hole, you put the dirt back up. Yeah, it's and I'm like, yeah,
that's how the business is done.
Yeah, and they're like, and we said like, look, we'll let you guys unionize our workforce, in exchange for giving us, getting us sub. They're like, oh yeah, we have relationships with Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer. We'll just tell them it's a green jobs thing, and they'll sign it.
Green jobs.
It was, and they told us, oh, the green jobs, green New York thing. A lot of that was bullshit. This was back in 2012, so that sort of thing was timely at the time. But that was one that to this day that I think is, and the way we packaged it was very funny. We had the Carly Rae Jepsen song, and it was very funny the way we packaged it. And James, I remember, I know James adored that story, and that was, but it did not get any play. I think Megyn Kelly covered it once, but it did not get any play, and it was unfortunate because it was just such a funny. It was just like pure, it was cinematic, and it was journalistic, and it was just a fun, and it was a relevant story because it involved taxpayer money. Green jobs, green New what was it called? Earth Supply and Renewal. So if your viewers want to look that up, Earth Supply and Renewal. Yeah, it's a very funny, and I think there's 2 videos. Make sure you watch the one with the Carly Rae Jepsen song, because that is a class. And you'll hear my voice behind the camera, and that was a classic. But that was an example of a story that just did not, for whatever reason, just dropped at the wrong time, and no one saw. It was like a tree falling in the forest.
So, out of all those people that you caught, would you say that half of them just worship money and another half worship themselves?
Well,
because the unions would do anything.
Yeah, unions.
Idea.
I think it was more money related, but I think the higher level people, it was narcissism. Vanity. These people had the approval of their own conscience to do very wicked things. When you convince yourself that you're up against the Third Reich, the second coming of the Third Reich, they do. When these people convince themselves Donald Trump is literally Hitler, and these horrible things about it's there's white supremacy and or Russian, the Russian asset, all that. When you actually that's how you get people like Thomas Crooks. That's how you get people like these Trump assassins. Is because you create, like any one of us, if we had an opportunity to go in a time machine to 1933 in Berlin and take out Hitler, of course we would do it. Of course we would do it, right? So you create this moral you create this moral paradigm where you convince these kids, you convince people that it is 1933, it is Berlin, and that is literally Hitler right there. And you are a hero in your own time, and history books will be written about you if you take out this literal Hitler. So you convince people, of course, Thomas Crooks had the approval of his own conscience because he had people like Jake Tapper and Jim Acosta and, Rachel Maddow. I'm not saying that he directly listened to that. I'm just saying you have this ecosystem where you have these people, for years and years and years, repeating these repeating over and over and over again, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Then you give these freaks the approval of their own conscience. So so anything they do is going to be virtuous.
So Christian, I want to do this thing. So it's been 2 hours now.
Wow.
We touched Project Veritas. I have a lot of other questions. Would you consider coming in a few weeks to do the part 2?
Sure.
That would be awesome. I just don't want to make this podcast 4 hours long.
Yeah.
So I had a blast.
Come back anytime. Yeah.
That's awesome. I had a blast. I believe this is the info that is needed because I was in my mind, I was the one that bashed Project Veritas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pfizer bought them.
Right.
I was told only one side story.
Right.
Right now, the audience.
But you're willing to listen. You're willing to listen to the other side. And that's what separates you from so many other people, is that you are...
Because you're an insider.
Yeah.
You worked with the guy.
Right.
You say that you're no longer friends with James O'Keefe, but you have great respect for the guy. and you said the facts, and he admitted the facts on the tape, and you can listen to the tape,
Yes.
which is 6 hours old, but you
Right.
can listen to the tape himself admitting he
Right.
did this, and that. So I'm always for the facts. I'm not for the feelings.
Right.
I'm for the facts. This is what happened.
Yeah.
That's it. So Christian, thank you for coming. God bless you. And I am willing to see you again in a week, tomorrow,
love it. Yeah.
whenever you tell me.
I'd
You're
love
good?
it. Yeah.
That's awesome.